making our member of our Coalition for Better Business and showcasing the amazing work that they do as one of our coalition members. With that being said, I will let all of the panelists introduce themselves now. We'll start off with Kirti Punia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kirti. I run a social business called Okai. We work with tribal women in the deepest parts of India to manufacture handmade apparel. Everything from manufacturing to retailing it online is done by Okai, which means we have our own e-commerce and we ship directly from India to the world. About 5 years ago, we were working with 350 women. Up until last year, we were working with 2,300 women. And over the pandemic, because the need was even more to help these artisans, we're now working with 27,000 women all across India. So that's what we really do. We're a part of the Tata Group. It's very important for a Tata company. Whatever comes from people and from the country must go back to it many times fold is really the premise of Tata. And being true to that cause, when we set up a plant, a salt plant on the coast of Gujarat, and saw that that area was prone to drought. The major source of income in our country is agriculture, but the second largest source of income is actually handicrafts, which is done in the homes by the women of our country. And so came the idea of Okai that while there is no income from agriculture, and if there is any problem on that front, there could be always that the women in the households could generate an alternate source. So from that thought until now, it's been a really long journey from being a training initiative to a nonprofit and now to a social business, which is running its own e-commerce. But here we are sharing with you our story today.
Thanks so much, Kirti. Next, I'd like to open the floor for Hillary Jockmans to introduce herself as well. Hillary, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry about that, folks. You'd think after 14 months of doing Zooms and everything, this would not be a problem anymore. But hello, my name is Hillary Jockmans. Thank you for having me here today. I am a government affairs consultant. I'm based in Washington, D.C. I worked on Capitol Hill for a number of years and also in New York State government as well. One of my focuses recently has been looking at where the nexus is of fashion and retail and public policy and where those issues come together and what's important to the community. So part of that involves sustainability issues. And so that's what I'm looking forward to speaking about today. I am also the founder of Political Fashion, which is a community for all those in the fashion industry. You be a designer, a retailer, a reporter, a lawyer, or a consumer. And it's an opportunity for you to become educated about these issues, to feel empowered about them, and to engage with elected representatives on what these key issues are. So look forward to talking about some of these today.
Thanks so much, and I'm excited to hear more, Hillary. And last but not least, I'd like to pass over to my co-moderator, Kristen Fanarakis.
Hi, everyone. Kristen Fanarakis. I am a senior consultant with the Center for Financial Policy, working with Russ Wormers. And I'm also the founder of an American-made luxury brand, Senza Tempo. And I have worked with Hillary over the last year. And one of the things she'll be talking about today is her call to update the Green Guides, which I am a signatory of as a brand founder. And so I'm looking forward to talking more about that today, and really, excited to, talk more about what it really means to be green as a brand, as a brand owner, and, the need for this today. So Nima, I'll pass it over to you.
Sounds great. To kick off today, our first question to Kirti. So Tata has had an interesting approach to sustainability and CSR initiatives, which is how Okai was founded. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, how Okai came about, operates, and approaches sustainability? Kirti, you're on mute still.
You know, the most popular word of 2020 is unmute. So, so anyway, um, I explained earlier that, you know, this was a requirement rather than, you know, just thought of an initiative. It was really the need of the hour when in 1996 there was a drought. But after we decided that we're going to set up a social business, we decided to work with women. We realized that the women in Indian households would not step out, and they would refuse to come to a center to work. They said, "We are happy to do whatever we can, but really, you need to facilitate that change at our homes because maybe that'll be a day in the future, but that's not the time right now." And we really had to prove the concept to the entire village and the men in the village that this is something that will bring you prosperity. So the Tata team is great at business, right? Great at processes and great at setting up those processes. So we designed a distributed manufacturing system where we have these vehicles that take raw materials and everything else that is required to make a garment in an auto rickshaw through the villages to pick and drop raw materials. Once the products are done, and almost like a production coordinator goes through the villages and collects all of them. Now, the design of this distributed manufacturing system helped us create a sustainable way to manufacture while women were working from their homes. At the same time, design the same product across 20 villages with the same accuracy so that the same design can be produced across villages. So slowly and steadily, these processes started to get adopted by the community itself. Artisans who were not educated went to school with their kids and passed their education and started running the production themselves. Tata has always been something that would bring in all the expertise, and the community has the talent. And I think that works so beautifully when you want to make a social business self-sustainable. Wherever a Tata company is present, I mean, in this case, it was in the coast of Gujarat. If it's doing something in another region, maybe it's mining or it's any other industry that it's working in, it looks to be honest with the community and the environment. And I think this has been one of those examples of a social business, which is a testimonial of this cause.
That's fantastic to hear and such an inspiring and exciting story, rationale, and the work that you're doing right now. You use different words throughout, like sustainable, social, ethical, and green. What do you think the approach should be to using these words when there isn't an overarching legal definition? And both for you, Kirti, and Hillary, if you have thoughts as well, how should corporations integrate these words when they are making decision making?
Do you want to go first, Hillary?
You go ahead. You go ahead. I got to think about this for a minute.
Okay, great. So I'd say about 5 years ago, every big company in India, their strategy presentation would have had sustainability as the biggest trend of the next 5 years. Now, that forced a lot of marketing teams to think of very creative ways to become more sustainable or look more sustainable. 88% consumers in India, they feel better while buying a sustainable alternative. 60% Indians have now stopped purchasing from companies that they perceive to be non-sustainable. 53% have switched to lesser known brands. These are all statistics that were raising big alarms, right? I'll give you an example. Last year, organization, which is a commercial fashion company, launched a campaign which had artisans exactly like Okai's artisans, standing in a campaign that looked exactly like our campaign, wearing clothes exactly like ours, and the caption read, wear this or buy this garment and this woman will be impacted. And the visuals looked exactly like Okai. Now, this both hurt Okai, of course, because people will now think that that large commercial organization is a sustainable company. But at the same time, many people recognize that visual as an Okai visual. and hence it only amplified our voice. At the same time, because we know these artisans and we work in rural areas, we realized that these artisans that were there in their campaign were rented, that they had actually paid those women to stand in that campaign, and the money was actually not going to those women at all. Now, these instances hurt sustainable organizations a lot. But at the same time, if customers can recognize the difference between an honest campaign and a non-honest campaign, this would really help us clear out the confusion in the industry. It's very easy to say that you're a sustainable brand, but I think consumers should ask for data and transparency. If they're saying that, okay, you're impacting women, how many women are you impacting? What is the wage that she makes? How much is the average wage of the woman? On this particular garment, how much did she earn? If those questions can be answered by an organization transparently, then you can trust that company. Otherwise, I think you must assume that the term has been used loosely unless proven.
Absolutely. I'd like to build on that a little bit here. I mean, I think you're right. We're seeing the term sustainable used so much these days. And I think we're really at a tipping point for the effectiveness of that word. Because right now there's not an acceptable definition or a universally agreed to definition on what sustainable means. And maybe that's not a bad thing, but you do need some sort of guardrails on the term so that it retains some integrity. So when people see it, they know it means a certain level of care or quality in both natural and human resources that are used in making garments. And so I think we're seeing a move in the US right now to kind of address those issues. We may get into this more later, but in terms of ESG and what companies have to disclose, they're looking for more standardization there. And one of the initiatives that we've been working on here with Politically in Fashion is with a call to the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, to update the green guides. And for those who don't know, the green guides are a federal regulation that are in place to guide businesses in making appropriate environmental claims about their products. And it also helps consumers to understand what it is that they are seeing and what they're reading. These guides have not been updated since 2012. And we feel that a lot has changed in both consumer behavior and technology in these past 9 years. And so we'd like the FTC to take a look at these guides. We don't presuppose the outcome. We want everyone to come to the table and have us start the conversation about what these guidelines mean. And part of that conversation may be what is sustainable. When they updated these guides in 2012, the FTC affirmatively did not touch on the word sustainable because they didn't feel they had enough buy-in on what that term meant. Well, I think everybody now has some opinions and data as to what this means. So we look forward to that discussion going forward, hopefully in the next year or two.
Hillary, maybe can we build on that a little bit? I'm not a lawyer. I'm an economist by training, and now I sort of split my time here doing kind of working on policy work with Russ and doing fashion design on the side. So I do a little bit of everything. Would there be a circumstance? So one of the things I avoid in my brand is I avoid saying this is sustainably made. I really avoid all of that completely. And because I don't see I don't see a legal definition around it, and so I sort of avoided it completely because my approach has always been you really can't prove any of this. I can't prove any of this, and the idea is you can pick up the garment and you can see for yourself. That is transparency. That's how I've approached it. Do you think the updating of the green guides, do you think that there would be parameters put around this in terms of, the definition of sustainable, may change as science changes, correct? Do you think that there would be parameters put around this?
Well, I certainly hope that there's some parameters around it, but personally, I would caution against too hard a definition because I do think sustainability means different things in different contexts. And that's okay. But my concern is when it means nothing, right? And you get to the point where you have some bad actors out there that are throwing around the turd, oh, it's sustainable. But when you do not even that deep a dive into it, you realize that it's not. At some point, consumers are going to see that frequently enough and just say, like, forget it. I've been willing to pay more for products that are sustainable, good for the environment, good for the workforce. But if that's not even the case, why am I bothering? And to me, that's the worst case scenario here, that we lose the momentum and all the good work that's been put into this space over the past, 5-10 years. For some, sustainability has to do with the products that are used to make the garment. For some, it has to do with the amount of natural resources that are used. For some, it has to do with the workforce. How do you treat the labor force that makes these products? And so I would caution against too hard a definition of sustainability, but having some sort of factor so you can use it as a metric to judge a product that you choose to buy, or in the case of investing, that you choose to invest in.
Is Congress tackling any of this? Oh, sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, Kirti, go ahead.
I just want to say that in India, at least, we use the term sustainability for Okai as a sustainable fashion brand because we want to be the definition of sustainability in India.
The gold standard.
Hillary, is Congress tackling any of this?
So they are in terms of investing. There are a couple of pieces of legislation that are moving right now having to do with what publicly traded companies have to disclose, ESG. Right now, it's really up to companies what they choose to disclose. But you've seen a growing desire from consumers to know what companies are investing in, and also I think investors are also looking to see, they want some hard data here, some metrics. So there's a move to sort of standardize the disclosure, and that's of course easier said than done. You'll have some opposition from folks who don't want any mandatory disclosures, and even within the community that does want the mandatory disclosures, how do you disclose? Do you make allowances for different industries? What are the metrics that you use? So there are a couple of pieces of legislation that are moving through Congress in both the House and the Senate. You're seeing a greater desire for that now with a Democratic-controlled Congress, as well as a Democratic administration. President Biden has been supportive of these initiatives. The SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, announced that they are having an opening for comments about a rule on the disclosures for publicly traded companies. So I expect to see some action here in DC sometime between the end of the summer, a little more movement in these spaces. There's just a general desire to have more information about companies as companies are becoming more socially active on a broad array of issues and speaking up. Consumers and investors want to know, okay, that's great, you're speaking about this issue, but what are you personally doing in these various different areas? So I think we'll see more in that space coming in the next few months.
Russ, I think that's a perfect segue for you to kind of come in. I mean, especially we just finished our SEC our big SEC conference, and for those who maybe are attending the CFP event for the first time, the CFP hosts a big annual conference with the SEC each year, and so we just hosted that last week, where Chair Gensler opened with remarks about this. So Russ, maybe you can kind of talk a little bit about this, from a data perspective, because your research is not in ESG, but you are an expert in quantitative finance and data, and you do sit on the SEC's Asset Management Advisory Committee. So you do have experience in this area, and one of the biggest problems that I know you're aware of, and you can't go a day if you read the fashion media, everyone talks in fashion about the lack of transparency, which is really a lack of data. I mean, that's what it boils down to, is there's just no, there's a lack of data. And when we did our project last year, we did when we did our ESG project last year with a group of students, one of the things, we figured out is the problems with the data. And, maybe you can kind of talk to us about, just from a data perspective, and kind of give us your thoughts on that.
Sure, Kristen. Yeah. Thanks for including me on the panel. So I think, yeah, first of all, disclaimer, I don't know a thing about the fashion industry, nor any less about sustainability in the fashion industry. I don't read any fashion magazines. I'm a complete quant nerd, so I read academic papers, but I think I'm on the panel because I think reported statistics about ESG-ness or sustainability or greenness or anything like that is starts to fall into the realm of the interest of finance academics, because we are starting to try to measure such things. So let me back up here a bit. A quant wants, I'm a quant. I teach quant portfolio management. Just submitted my grades yesterday for my undergrads, and I was very gentle, so they'll be okay. But a quant wants verifiable information, precise information that's verifiable to use in a model, statistical model. And so most quants turn to things like accounting statements, income statements, balance sheets, or they turn to market data, because you can trust pretty much, what's the volume of trade in a particular stock or things like this. One of the problems with, there are many problems with ESG reporting, and I'll address this as ESG because I'm not quite sure how to define greenness. I just know ESG-ness. Part of the problem with ESG is that there is not a lot of verifiable information out there. So, for instance, I was looking this morning at MSCI's KLD stats, refreshing myself this morning on how they form their ratings, their ESG ratings for companies. And it reminded me of last summer. You said we worked with students and we looked at a bunch of, not a bunch, but a few different ratings, ESG ratings services, MSCI among them. But MSCI basically gathers data from publicly available sources like 10Ks, sustainability reports, government databases. They look at the media, what the media says about a company, and maybe some of this is self-reported by companies as well. NGOs, they look at macro data, all sorts of things. But it doesn't really, depending on the exact item within the ESG score, it's not, some of the sub-scores that MSCI assigns to their ESG ratings, and there are many sub-scores, are very squishy. They're very squishy. They are based on interpretation by MSCI, at least from what I can tell, from reading some information about a company. There are also surveys conducted. I'm not sure to what extent MSCI uses survey information, which is voluntary information from companies. But there's just a lot of uncertainty about the quality of the information out there that exists, which makes quants and those like myself who want to study the actual impact of ESG stewardship, if you will, on corporate profits, on social or community responsibility, things like this. And then I think, so I think part of this is because, as the panelists have said already, sustainability is a word that is 50 years old now, and has meant a whole lot of different things over the years. Like we recycle, so we're sustainable, or we only use cotton. We don't use so the evolution of sustainability has been very imprecise until recently, and I think it has inherited a lot of that imprecision. And I think the prior panelists, Hillary and Curdy, I think expressed it pretty well. Is that to different companies, sustainability means different things, because to their consumers, sustainability means different things. So how do you I guess, put this into a cohesive package of metrics. I think it's been really tough. Again, depending on which subscore that you're talking about, some things are more easily measured than others. And I think the last thing, and then I'll turn it back to you, Kristen, is that I think ESG has suffered from just everything being lumped into the ESG score, this goodness score, if you will, or sustainability score. This means that there are literally probably hundreds of different things that you could consider to be a part of ESG. And I think it has suffered from this, I guess, aggregation into one big factor called ESG rating or ESG-ness or sustainability or what have you. And I think it's made it very difficult to actually come up with precise indicators or metrics or indicia of what does this mean for this industry? What does it mean for that industry? You know, so it's got a long ways to go just to be definitional. Last point I'd like to make is that last summer, when I was working on this with the students, I was learning a lot myself. And the objective was to learn how do these different rating agencies actually do this. And it's not even clear how they do it, you know. So not only do, you know, we think, and I relayed some of the things that I've read in the MSCI documentation, but it's not clear exactly how they're doing it. So how do you analyze and assess a ratings system when you don't even know what they're doing? So anyway, a whole host of problems there, and I'm happy to talk more about any of these. But let me shoot it back to you.
So just transitioning this back to Kirti, you earlier said with Okai, you are setting yourself as the gold standard. And Russ was discussing this different ESG metrics for larger corporations that are being disclosed. As a social enterprise, how do you measure and what metrics do you utilize to know that you are being that gold standard and you're continuing to exceed and push that bar up for the rest of society? And being that you're coming from a different place in reporting, how do these metrics impact your decision making as an organization?
It's a good question, and I think when he's talking about data, it's so important to discuss that at this point because a lot of the companies don't even collect data. So honestly, the first thing to do is to collect as much data as possible and to review that data on a weekly, fortnightly, monthly basis. So first and of course, like the number of artisans we impact is something that is very easily available to us. But how much is that person really making month on month is even more important, especially because they are working from home, which means that they cook a meal, they sit down for 10 minutes and do some embroidery, and then they go take care of their kids, and then they go out somewhere, then they go to the farm in the evening, and then they come back and work a little bit more. So in that case, how do you really tell how many minutes or how many hours a day was a person able to give and what wages should they be making? So if you can collect time study data, right? So that's what we do at our centers is we do time studies to really figure out a single unit of work and how much time that should take. And then if that person was working 8 hours a day, how much should they be able to do? And then accordingly, is that a fair wage or not, according to minimum wages or what the government pays, or what is the perceived value for that level of craft as well, because there are different levels of craft from like really easy to difficult. Now that is when it comes to human beings and social impact. It's very important to note the environmental impact as well. So a few months ago, not too long ago, we decided to eliminate plastic and we decided to measure how much plastic we were using. And because we were discussing this so much and reviewing all of that information coming in every week, it started to percolate down right to the last sourcing manager at Okai. And I started to notice that everyone started to switch from anything plastic to an alternative. And I started to notice that they were replacing plastic buttons with coconut shells, and internal transportation had moved from plastic bags to bags that were zippable and could be reused between two locations, to our mailers becoming compostable. So I think plastic is definitely something that you have to measure, and you have no choice. You don't know your carbon footprint because that's not easy to calculate at all. But really what you can do is take such initiatives and measure those quantities of toxic materials. Now, I'll give you an example of dyes. Dyes are extremely harmful. There are some dyes which can be carcinogenic. So we decided to measure what percentage of our dyes were absolutely eco-friendly, and what were the suppliers doing with the effluent that would come out of the treatment process when you would dye. And that helped us actually lab test all of our fabrics randomly and figure out if any of those fabrics had those carcinogens. So I think that is one of the other things that we measure. Most definitely, it's really important to measure the back and forth in logistics, right? So in India, there is this culture where people order and it's cash on delivery. And they love ordering, but they cancel the order. So it's an impulse buy, almost like you enjoyed shopping online. And by the time the parcel gets to you, you don't want it anymore. And you say it on the doorstep that, take it back, I don't want it anymore. So the parcel goes back to the organization, and that is an extremely expensive and extremely carbon intensive process. So we stopped doing it. We said it will cost us business. It was almost 40% of our business, but we decided we're no longer going to do this. We're no longer going to send these orders out, even if it costs us our growth. So these were some of the things that we measure. Of course, consumption of fabric and the composition of fabric itself. What percentage of your fabric is synthetic? What percentage of your fabric is hand woven versus machine woven? You know, your skin is the largest organ, and if you're not eating something that's toxic free, you should not be wearing it either. So I think those are things that we try and dig into. We obsess a little bit about this, and we have this chart of our entire value chain and what we can do across the entire value chain when it comes to all the different P's: product, people, processes, packaging, every single thing that we can think of.
Fantastic. I think all of those were just so valuable metrics, mindsets, and philosophies of what to measure. Before Kristen asks the next question, I just wanted to let the audience know we're getting close to the end of our list. And if you have any questions you would like for the panelists, feel free to use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen to share any questions that we'll be asking to them afterwards. But back to you, Kristen.
No, I was just gonna say I love. I have to say that's actually an approach that I've taken with my brand. When you made the point about how it's really, it's really hard to measure your carbon, your carbon footprint, and it's really complicated. But you can really just kind of take a logical, common sense, grassroots approach. So I like, for one of the things that I do is I just try to use local suppliers. So rather than shipping fabrics all the time back and forth from Europe or New York, I just try to source things that are in LA. So they're literally just walking fabric down the street. Way less carbon intensive. I was like, there's no, it was like when somebody just has to, walk 2 blocks down the street, you have that fabric's already there. So I was like, I love that, just sort of, the grassroots, kind of that grassroots approach. I think it's far more sensible. And it's an approach that I take. I think people make this very complicated and take a very complicated approach rather than, just really kind of thinking about it as, like you said, like at a portfolio level, and, just kind of linking, it's like, where are your biggest risks in a way?
Kristen, I just want to jump in for a quick second, if I could, about some of my co-panelists are talking about here, and the importance of data.
Yes.
I think that is not emphasized enough within the fashion space. It's important to recognize, and this is something I advise all my clients, regardless of industry, the importance of data to make your case, not just anecdotal, but really numbers to back up your claims or your asks or whatever. You know, fashion is an industry, right? It's not just flirty and fun, it is an industry, and it needs to act like an industry. And part of that is having data to quantify what you do and what your claims are. And it's important to note that, you know, all the moves in Washington right now dealing with ESG disclosures, those are only for publicly traded companies. So that's not a lot of fashion companies. So they're going to need to maybe look to publicly traded as a role model, or take something on themselves. But this isn't necessarily going to be a huge game changer within the fashion industry if regulations do come through.
But do you think that's for the FTC green guides maybe come in where they're, you know, where that might have a bigger impact? Where, you know, that where you may get, you know, whereas now you don't really get in trouble if you claim, oh, this product is green, this product is ethical. I really can say whatever I want at this point. I can make any claim.
The green guides do provide very valuable guidelines, that's why they're called guides, for what you can and can't do in places like recycling or composting, right? It doesn't necessarily give a hard definition of what is recycling, but it says you can't make a claim that your product is recyclable if X percentage of the product is not recyclable, or if you can only recycle it in one small part of the country that's not really applicable to the vast population, right? So they've found ways around coming up with necessarily a hard definition, but providing guidelines so what you're saying is not just truthful, but really impactful and meaningful to consumers.
Sorry, I had to unmute for a second. I was looking for the cursor. Kirti, do you think that there should be a minimum level of disclosure? It's like, you know, not to keep putting you on the spot, but we keep talking about, you know, transparency, and we keep talking about, you know, when you think about, you know, you want to establish, you know, OCI as the gold standard, and, you know, do you think there, and, you know, and Hillary, I would probably pose this question to you as well. Do you think that there should be a minimum level of disclosure for brands? I mean, there, you know, we have to put, as a brand, at least in the US, and I don't know what the rules are in, you know, in India, but as a brand in the US, you have to put country of origin, we have to put content, we have to put our content, but that's really that, you know, and we have to put care. That's all we have to put at this point. That's all, you know, legally, that's all you have to put on a piece of clothing. Should there be more?
Absolutely. So who made it? I think why just country of origin, but where was it made? How much was the artisan paid? Composition is very important, and it's very loosely mentioned on most labels. It would say a silk blend. Now, what is it blended with? Is it viscose or polyester? What percentage? How was it sourced? And I think composition can really be extremely beneficial for consumers to then understand and make their decision. When it comes to dyes, what kind of dyes were used, because that can be extremely harmful. Now, there are laws around it, of course. You cannot, for example, US has very stringent laws on what kind of dyes can be imported into US. So you already have that level of regulation coming in, but it should be on the labels. I would compare it to food regulation. When you're consuming a packet of chips, you know every single thing that has gone into the ingredients, and you know where it was manufactured, just in case you need to go and cross-check. I think the level of regulation should be similar to food.
I agree, but I think also you need to, there's a lot of education that has to go into it for consumers, so that when they see what is disclosed, that it actually means something. We've gotten accustomed to knowing, you know, trans fats are bad, or this, that, or the other thing are bad when it comes to food, but I don't think people understand necessarily that, you know, rayon's good, viscose is bad, or vice versa, you know. So when they see it's a blend of something, okay, it's a blend, and right, like, what does that mean for you? And you talked about it before, like not putting something in your body that is harmful. Why would you put it on your body? And I think that's why the green guides and sustainability issues resonate so much with folks, because other issues that impact the industry, maybe tariff issues or production issues, things like that, you understand it sort of on a macro level, but it doesn't, you don't feel it as well. Whereas you literally feel the fabric up against the largest organ of your body. And people, it's impactful to folks, and you want to protect that the same way you protect your inside based on what you eat, or maybe cosmetics that you put on your skin. So I think there's a lot of interest in learning more from folks, but there has to be a way to disseminate that information in a way that's meaningful. Again, going back to the green guides, I think one of the really positive things about these is that they are written in a way that is very understandable. You know, you don't need to cross-reference to the code. You don't need a law degree to look at them. You can just look at it and say, okay, this is what I need to do as a producer of a product, or okay, this is what it means as a consumer and what I'm buying. And I'd like to see that as a role model for other disclosures going forward.
I think I just want to kind of pick up on the, Kirti, what you talk about the skin. That's such an important thing. And I was like, I only use natural fabrics, and it's something that amazes me. 60% of our clothing is polyester, yet we all freak out about drinking out of plastic water bottles. I mean, it's like, it's such a disconnect. And it goes to exactly your point, Hillary, it's just the lack of education. Nima, do you want to take the audience questions?
Yeah, so we had an interesting question from our audience. As a consumer, and knowing that we have global supply chains where fabric is made somewhere, modified elsewhere, and finished perhaps in the US or near me, how do I tell if a product actually has ESG principles at every stage in its manufacture? And how do I score the relative ESG score between two products? I'll open this up for the panelists. One thought that I had to share before we share this is I think that is a problem we have, and that's what Russ was saying earlier with data. We don't have a lot of this data. A lot of this, and everyone was saying actually, is people aren't reporting these. So currently as a consumer, unless you're willing to spend hours digging, diving, calling, and going further and further, there are very few vendors that you can actually have this. And this is why we have these three individuals as part of our panel. Is the difficulty is whether you're a company that's ethically doing this, lobbying for this action, or have the data, this is the problem that we're facing. But I'll open it up to the panelists as well for any thoughts.
I'll make a quick comment on this, Nima. I mean, I think this is an extremely complicated issue of figuring out where you sourced it, where the supply chain went to next, and so on. I think it's one, that also touches upon, I think, something that I believe it was Hillary that said that it's mainly public companies who are disclosing information. So I think the relevance of all this, I think, is, from my point of view, is that large companies are going to be better able to disclose, exactly what, Nike or Apple, they're going to be forced by their consumers to, give you details about the value chain. How much did they pay the worker in Thailand, northern Thailand, to make the shoe sole or whatever? How much in China for the Apple circuit board or what have you? I think there's a big issue here in terms of small and mid-sized companies potentially being disadvantaged, that I'm very concerned with, that they may not be able to compete with large companies in terms of all of the disclosure and rules. And then just lastly, I just want to comment on Hillary's comment, which I think is right spot on, is like, we don't know, what should be reported on a label. You can't report everything, and it's not clear what is important and what's not important. So there needs to be some type of standardization, and maybe that comes in the form of every industry has their own standardization or something like that, but I'm just not sure.
They're looking at sector-specific regulation even within the ESG world, as well as an acknowledgement that different metrics apply more to certain industries than others.
So I'm just going to add to this that there are two ways for companies to do this. The number one option is to buy from someone who can provide you a certificate that it is authentic, right? Because you cannot go to their farm or check where cotton's grown. But if they have certification and everyone in the value chain has certification to show each other, it then builds a sustainable value chain. The second way to do this, and this is something I'm trying right now, is to actually know the farmer who produced the cotton, source the cotton, give it to the weaver, then tailor the product, then sell the product, and then try and do the entire value chain yourself. No matter how small, the organization, this takes a little bit of time, but it's not impossible to do. And then that would be the 100% sure way to really know that it was done sustainably.
That's actually very similar. I mean, that sort of vertical supply chain is how many of the luxury brands operate. It's how, it's how Hermes, it's how Chanel operates, and many of the luxury brands, they really own all parts. They own their entire supply chain simply because they want the quality control for them. That's what's important. So maybe you have consolidation, and sorry, I'm weighing in as not as a moderator, as a little bit of a panelist here. And maybe Russ, maybe you can kind of answer this question, but do you think, could you maybe if the big players are forced to, make these upgrades, do you maybe does this have a downstream effect to smaller players? Because if the big player, because a lot of times the big players can kind of force some of the smaller players that may supply a lot of the bigger brands. So I'm working for examples, I'm working with a supplier that supplies a lot of the big luxury brands. They're going to have to meet those big luxury brands standards. So I simply benefit from their, the standards that they have to meet, because they're supplying large public luxury brands. So I think, is that something that you would see typically?
I think it depends on the industry. In some cases, large companies can force smaller companies out of business by having lower cost structures for doing this I guess tracing of content and origin of things. So I think it really depends on the industry, whether the leaders, the big companies, are going to pull the small companies along with them, or they're actually going to use this as a competitive hammer to take away any type of chance that a small company has.
I've got two last questions. Russ, I have one question for you, and I have one question for Kirti to kind of wrap things up, because I think we're getting to the top of the hour here. We mentioned, Hillary mentioned this, how the SEC has put out a call for public comment about climate change. Chair Gensler opened our conference last week with remarks about how the SEC is going to be focusing on, the need for greater disclosures around, around climate change and workplace disclosures. One of the comments that the SEC has out there is, and I'm going to quote from the SEC's page, is, they asked whether climate related requirements should be one component of a broader ESG framework. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think that ESG disclosures should be related to broader climate disclosures? Do you think that they're related? Should they be treated separate? Do you have thoughts on this?
So I guess you're talking to me. I think that's a really hard question to answer. And I don't want to get ahead of myself, being on the AMAC, the committee that advises the investment management division of the SEC. It's a great question. I don't know how, disclosure, I don't know which direction we're going to go or the FCC is going to go in terms of requiring disclosure, whether they will start with climate carbon disclosure, maybe because they deem that to be the most serious problem right now. Maybe more of a problem than plastics and things like that, which are also problems. But yeah, so I just don't know which way it's going to go. And sorry to punt on that, but I think it's a great question that we're going to have to deliberate.
And Kirti, I want to wrap up with you. One of the, we've touched on this. We've touched on this and kind of skirted around it throughout the whole discussion today. But do you think the way marketers have, sort of co-opted the use of sustainable and ethical, do you think this has helped or hurt Okai throughout the years? And do you, in sort of what is your kind of outlook and thoughts on that? Do you think, what do you think about that? I know that's a tough question.
So my answer would be both. It's hurt Okai definitely because these are large organizations, and if they use the word loosely, we're going to lose our customers who believe that they are buying something sustainable when they're not. But it's also helped Okai because it's building that education in the consumers across India. It's making the word sustainability commonplace. And I think that should be something that, we should look at the positive side of this and really cannot do much about what other organizations will do. I think it's important to stay the course and just keep doing what you're doing, because the customers will eventually be able to see and be transparent, like be excessively transparent about your organization. So anyone who's watching Okai's Instagram account can see the women who work with Okai, can see their village, can see their kids, their husbands, what they're doing every day. And that level of transparency is impossible for an organization that's greenwashing to do. They will not be able to share their supply chain, the names of their artisans in public. So when you do something which is setting the bar for being transparent and sustainable, you will eventually be a leader, and the consumers will really see through that. A quick pitch here is that my vision is to make India the ethical factory for the world. And if there's any fashion designers out there in this watching this webinar, I would urge you to reach out to us, because we could be your sustainable supply chain from India.
I love that inspiring thought you're leaving us with, Kirti. Hillary, any last words of wisdom on your end as well to take us home?
Well, I don't think I'll be as inspirational as our previous panelists, but I would just, for folks that are interested in following these issues, I mean, you follow what's happening at the national level, both at the administration with the SEC, but also the Fed and DOL, what's happening in Congress, and also look to the states. California has really been very progressive on these issues. There are a few bills moving through there, and also smaller localities throughout the country. So I think that will be impacting the debate going forward too.
Thank you all three so much for your time, sharing your thoughts with our audience. Kirti, Hillary, and Russ, we really appreciate your insights. If you're interested in learning more, definitely follow any of our organizations. You can learn more about the Center for Financial Policy through the web link in the chat, or the Center for Social Value Creation. But we want to thank all of you for your time, for your support, and look forward to making the world a better place together. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.